Hi everyone. Welcome to Intro to App Install with Google. My name is Sean.
And I'm Bao.
We work on a team called App Dev here. I've been at Google for 3 years. I started on the web side and then moved over to the app side about a year ago.
I've been at Google for 2 years, also spent a year on the website, and been with apps for about a year now.
So Google has a lot of app offerings to help you promote your app. The issue is there's a lot of them, and that can be very, very complicated. So we're here today to help you figure out how to start with promoting your app, where you should go, what will work really well for the app that you're trying to promote, and where Google can help. The thing about Google is there's a lot of products that are constantly improving, and they're used all around the world. So there's a lot of data that we can use to really help you grow your app. That being said, let's go into one of our best products, which is search. Google's bread and butter has been search. We've been working on it for 15 years, and it's gotten really, really good. The greatest thing about search is that it's very intent-based. So somebody that's looking for you can find you easily wherever they are. That being said, Val, why don't you tell us more about search? What makes it great, and why is it so good for all of these app promoters out there?
Exactly. So Sean, as you mentioned, because the intent is high, we typically expect quality of the users coming from these ads to also be pretty high. So expect that when you're looking into search and deciding on, if I want to have different parts of Google's network, which network could potentially have one of the highest quality scores. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to understand, too, from an expectation standpoint, is that the actual cost per install, or CPI, and volume will be very dependent on your keywords. We've worked with other developers before where sometimes search scales the most, sometimes search is actually the least in terms of scale, and that really depends on your keywords. So understand that while the quality can be very high, it's all very dependent on the keywords and, of course, the ads you use. So those are a few of the big things you have to think about when you're looking into search.
Okay, so pretty much to sum up search, it sounds like really good quality, really good volume, low CPIs. So then, with that being said, what would you say are some of the best practices that you have for search?
Yeah, so there's quite a few best practices, actually. The first thing you want to do, for sure, is to do your own research on what are the actual popular keywords for your app and your ad specifically. There's a variety of tools you can use to do this. You can use Google Trends. You can even search up other competitors and maybe see where their ads are popping up. But definitely want to do a lot of really good research on the keywords you want to go after. The other thing you want to do is, if you ever create a search campaign before, you know that you could have the campaign have multiple ad groups with their own ads in it. So what you want to make sure to do is to have your keywords relevant to the ads in the ad group. Just a really quick example, you might want to have different ads pop up for keywords related to your app name or maybe your brand, compared to other ads that might pop up for keywords that are related to what your app does, but not so much the name. So that's a really basic thing you want to keep in mind when you're understanding how to build out the search campaign. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you want to control just how more frequently your ad shows up or how high up the actual position your ad will go, bid is the easiest way to do it. So for a lot of our search campaigns, whether they're on a target CPA bidding or on a CPC bidding, the higher that is, typically the higher the ad will pop up. So one thing to keep in mind if you want to be sure to jack up the position of your ad. And the last thing to keep in mind is that if you're expanding globally, so you're not only having campaigns and ads showing up in English-speaking countries, but other countries that speak different languages, localized creatives are always better. So if you ever have the resources to localize the ads or even just localize the keywords, definitely recommend that, and that's a common strategy that a lot of our developers that expand globally do.
Absolutely. And I think actually one other thing for search that kind of goes overlooked sometimes is on mobile, search it's even more important to have a higher position on the page because mobile screens are smaller. So focusing on that average position and getting it as high as possible is really, really important, especially on mobile.
Yeah, and especially on the Play Store, where there is currently one slot.
Yep, that's true. Okay, so let's switch gears. Let's go into display. So display for Google is a very, very widespread network. You can reach just about anyone, anywhere. On the website, as most of you may know, Google has something called the Google Display Network, and you see ads all over the internet that are supposed to pique your interest, that should, show you something that you may have not seen before, but could be something that you would use. That being said, on the mobile side, we have AdMob, and AdMob's goal is to show ads to users who might be interested in the product that you have or the app that you have on the mobile apps that they already use. That being said, it can be really difficult to target exactly which users there are out there on AdMob. Bao, do you have anything to tell us about that?
Yeah, so one of the things to really expect in terms of display and AdMob, Sean, like you're saying, it's nice because there is such a large depth and breadth of this network. So you really want to understand, well, how do I want to use this network? And there's two schools of thought here. So you could either use the size of the network to go for broad targeting, or you can use the size of the network to actually get very specific. So expectations change depending on what you're doing. So let's say you're going with a broad targeting. Then what you could expect there is high volume, because we have quite a few apps in our AdMob network, currently about 650,000 apps, and then of course we have the mobile web, which is pretty expansive. So we expect volume to be high, and with regards to that, CPIs could typically be low just because you're getting a lot more conversions than specific targeting. In terms of quality, because you're reaching such a wide audience, it can vary. We've seen other developers where even though they're going with the broadest targeting, quality can be very high. So be sure to keep that in mind if you're looking to the broad targeting aspect of display. If you're going with very specific targeting, that's another great part of our network too, because for display, it is so wide. You can start getting very specific in terms of, well, I actually want to target users who are in these types of apps, or maybe who have installed these apps before. And that's great. But whenever you're doing that, expect that you're getting lower volume because you're looking at a specific chunk of the display network. In regards to that, depending on who you are targeting, CPIs can vary. Sometimes they can be on the high side if you're targeting a very, very valuable segment of the display network. And in terms of quality, if you are typically targeting more targeted user, we've seen developers expect a higher quality. So those are the two main things to keep in mind if you're looking to display as part of your Google advertising strategy.
Got it. Got it. So in a nutshell, it sounds like display really broad, a lot of high volume, but you can get a lot of low CPIs and find a lot of users quickly. Any best practices there? Any general tips?
Yeah, there's actually several. So if you're going with the broad targeting, we typically want to use a strategy called run a network, where when you're creating the campaign, you create an ad group, you don't really have any specific targeting. You let our algorithm called Conversion Optimizer actually find installs at or below your target CPA bid, whatever that is. So that's the very first best practice if you're just going to go with the broad targeting. If you want to optimize for users with what we call high lifetime value or high LTV, what you could actually do is have one campaign and have multiple ad groups with a different targeting, just so you can start seeing the installs coming in and where they're coming from. So a common example would say, let's say you want a campaign to also target users who've installed social apps before, but you might also want to target users who made in-app purchases before. What you could do is, when you have the campaign, just have those as two different ad groups. As you're having the installs coming in, you're seeing, I like installs from this ad group versus this ad group. By having it broken out that way, you can actually start pausing, adding in, doing other things to those ad groups. So whenever you're going for more than just installs at scale, that's the kind of setup you want to have. Another thing to keep in mind is that creative refreshes will be typically needed for your ads. On the display network, that also includes all types. So you probably are familiar with images. You've probably seen a lot of those banners, interstitials. But in our display network, we also have the ability to have what we call text ads, which are actually ads that look like search ads, but they automatically pull information from your app's Play Store or App Store. So it's actually a really great, easy way to get ads on the display network very quickly. If you have more creative resources, we also do support video ads too. So these would show up as video interstitials. So by using all of those ads, it's great, because if you use all of them, you get the most inventory of our display network. But as I mentioned earlier, creative refreshes are very important, because over time, your ads can get stale, especially if they're showing up to users multiple times that haven't converted yet. So you're going to want to keep that in mind by looking at your campaign's performance over time, noticing if there's any dips, and then when there are dips, switch out the ads.
Awesome. And I want to highlight one thing Bao alluded to just now. It's really important to use all the various ad types out there on the display network. Unlike on search and unlike on some of the other products that we're going to talk about, with display, you have the opportunity to focus on a text ad and a video ad, as well as a full screen interstitial, to really take advantage of all the real estate on a mobile screen. That being said, it is really, really difficult to make sure that every ad that you use will be engaging, will have a call to action. So keep those things in mind when you're creating those ads.
Yep.
Moving on to my favorite ad type and my favorite network, YouTube. It's no secret that YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world after Google. And so there's a lot of volume out there. There's billions of people that use YouTube. And the important thing to realize here is that all of the content on YouTube is video, or most of it at least. And that content is very high quality, it's very engaging, and it generally has a really high conversion rate. Bao can tell us a ton more about YouTube. He loves it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on YouTube all the time. But when you're going to use it for advertising, a couple of things you want to keep in mind in terms of expectations. As Sean alluded to, very engaging ad units. So we typically see developers get really high quality users actually coming from this premium network. Because of that, though, as you expect from a CPI standpoint and even volume, both can be high. The volume is just so vast. I forget the exact metric off the top of my head, but there are literally millions, if not billions, of viewers every day. So you can imagine all of these other advertisers want to compete on that. So do expect average CPI and other related metrics to be pretty high when it comes to just YouTube specifically. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is that the time it takes for a user to actually convert. So not just install the app, but maybe open the app and do any of the other post-install metrics you might be tracking. It's typically a longer window. And there are a couple of reasons for it, but one common reason is that the actual ad experience is different. So when you're a user, if you've ever seen a YouTube ad on your mobile phone before, it'll typically appear right before the video. And if you choose to install the app, it actually installs the app in the background and lets you get right back to your video. So as you can imagine, if I'm watching Kanye West's latest music video, I might see the ad and think, cool, let me install the app. But then I want to get right back to it. So that's different, right, compared to maybe a search ad where you're searching for the app. And then as soon as you install it, you might want to open it. So keep that in mind. If you're going to be using YouTube, if you're doing a large test campaign, make sure you're looking from a longer time frame. So maybe 3 to 4 weeks as opposed to 2 to 3 weeks when you're looking to see, oh, have all the users that have installed the app, are they doing other things in the app now? So those are some of the big things to keep in mind when you're looking at YouTube.
Awesome. And so I think 2 things here that Bao mentioned: engaging ad unit, create an ad that works really, really well by telling people what the product is about, and then the conversion window is longer. So it may not work immediately, but after 7 days, you should see some really great conversion rates. Bao, what general tips do you have for us?
Yeah, a lot of important general tips here. So the big thing, if you're even thinking about YouTube, is just really make sure to understand who and what your users like to watch to figure out the kind of targeting you want to do. If it turns out that your user base, honestly, is pretty broad because that you're the type of user that uses your app is broad, then great. You can leverage the sheer scale of YouTube and go with more broad targeting. But let's just say your app is very specific. So if your app is a music app, for example, and there are specific artists your user base likes, well, then you're going to want to make sure that if you're going to do specific targeting, you're targeting those users. So be sure to have that concept in mind when you're thinking about how to target on YouTube. Like with display, same kind of thing. You're going to want to be very attentive to the creative refreshes of your video ads. So if you notice in your campaigns, performance is dipping, maybe it's because the videos are getting stale, switch them out. And then in terms of the actual ad types, it's pretty cool with YouTube. You've probably seen it before where the videos do pop up. The video ads pop up before the video, and you get a chance to skip it. But we've also recently launched a new format called YouTube in Display. So be sure to check that out, because these are the actual ads that pop up in the YouTube homepage as well as the YouTube search results, which are actual thumbnails. So the way the user would do this is they would click on the thumbnail, and then the video would actually play. So feel free to do some more research on that if you think that ad type would be just as effective as a video ad that plays right before the video. And then, like with search and even display, localized ad creatives are always better, especially, like we mentioned, these ad units are just so engaging that you want to be very attentive because users in each country might react differently to videos that either have their own ad text or their language or even are just shot differently. So if you're going to go global, be sure to keep that in mind and be attentive of those local tendencies.
Awesome, awesome. And one quick thing about YouTube that I get a lot of questions about. That little skip button that you always see there, if somebody clicks that on your ad, you're not charged. You're only charged if somebody actually watches the video. So that's an important nuance to keep in mind. Before we jump into our next product, I wanted to mention that we're covering a lot of stuff here. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. If you do, just go over to our AdWords community page and leave a comment. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of this. So our next product, Universal App Campaigns. This product is really special, and I'll tell you why. It is the first product that Google built that focuses only on apps. It was a campaign built to help with app promotion, and it takes advantage of all of the other products that we mentioned. So within Universal App Campaigns, we have search, we have display, we have YouTube, and it's really, really easy to set up. It takes 4 lines of ad text. If you have a YouTube video, you throw it in there, set up, your target CPI and where you want to show your ad, and you're done. Val, tell us more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Sean mentioned, it's the quickest, easiest way to promote your Android app on all three of our networks. So if you're a developer and you needed X number of Android installs yesterday, well, honestly, if you're going to go with AdWords, Universal App Campaigns is the best way to go. So make sure to keep that in mind if that is your main goal. The other thing is with the way it works, since our campaign, our Universal App Campaign, looks at so many signals from all three of our networks, it will always go for installs at scale at or below your target CPA. So again, that's the main goal of it, and that's what honestly makes it so great.
Awesome, awesome. So what are some general tips that you have for us? What's the best practice? How do we make UAC the best thing?
Yeah, well, it's actually pretty straightforward if you just keep a couple of general tips in mind. So one thing to keep in mind is that, again, a lot of the ads and keywords generated are based on the ad text ideas. So be sure to look up and make sure that the ad text ideas are correct and accurate. If you look up the actual instructions and descriptions of how these are created, they're typically what we call independent lines. So make sure if you're going to have these 4 ad text ideas, make sure 2 of the lines aren't dependent on each other. They should be independent, because what the campaign actually does is use the lines to shuffle them around to create the ads and figure out the keywords generated automatically by it. So make sure those are nice and tight. The other thing, too, is that country-level targeting per campaign is typically ideal. Because the campaign is going to go after all 3 of our networks at the same time, as we alluded to earlier, some countries you might find that your ads do differently on different parts of the network. Maybe in the US, searching YouTube is effective, but maybe in Germany or Russia, perhaps the display campaigns are effective. So if you're going global and you want to actually control the quality coming from each country, we really do recommend country-level targeting as well.
Awesome. 2 things to add in there about UAC. One, it's Android only right now. We do have an iOS version that was announced at Google I/O last month. That should be available very soon. Second, outside of the ad text that you input into creating a UAC, one other thing that we use to really understand your product, get some images, and see how it's doing is your Google Play page. So stuff that with a lot of information about the app. Put your best images into it, put some videos into it, and the better that is, the more well-rounded that is, the better ads we can automatically create for you, which I think is the best part about UAC. You don't need to create any ads. It does it all for you.
Very cool. All right, so then the next section, right before we get to the questions, are the advanced AdWords techniques. So we covered a lot of the basics and a lot of the general tips, but this section, especially for you more savvy advertisers out there, are some of the more advanced techniques that we want to make sure you guys are aware of too, just to further increase performance. So one common practice is a lot of our campaigns run target CPA bids, so when should we increase and what to expect by it? And you really want to make sure to use these target CPA bid increases in the situations where you'd want to drive more volume. Now, of course, you only want to do that when the campaigns are working well. So the way to do it is whatever metrics you're looking at, whether it's are my campaigns hitting a certain CPI or my campaigns hitting a certain quality threshold. Well, as soon as that's happening and you want to drive more of the volume you do have, that's when you increase it. Now, in terms of how much to increase it by, that's also very important. If you want to maintain the level of what you have now, but you do want to spike in volume, you typically don't want to increase the target CPA bid more than 25% on a daily basis. So if you know in your head that perhaps you can't afford to go from a $5 bid to a $10 bid, that's great. But don't go from $5 to $10 in one go, otherwise our algorithm might get confused. Instead, incrementally increase 25% per day. That's also nice because that will allow you to keep the performance fairly stable in case you notice any sharp differences in it too. So that way you're a lot safer, but you can still drive more volume. So those are some things to keep in mind when it comes to target CPA increases. In terms of other advanced techniques, there are also some vertical insights that we'll share here, but we definitely recommend doing some other research to go deeper into what your other competitors and experts in the industry are saying. But a couple of things for some of these select industries here is that for gaming, if you have a game that is related to a specific IP versus not having an IP, you can expect those strategies to be very different. So for example, a lot of the networks that rely on brand, like search, like YouTube, you can expect to have different levels of performance if there are more things that your users could recognize compared to perhaps a game or app that no one really knows about yet. So that strategy is very different. When it comes to on-demand services, we've actually seen a lot of our largest developers get really savvy and actually break out different ad groups or campaigns based on specific locations, because they could have ads tailored to those locations. So for example, if you're a food delivery app, then you can have very specific ads targeting San Francisco versus targeting New York City, right? So a very effective strategy. Definitely recommend that if you're within that industry. And then when it comes to news or any apps that rely on any kind of seasonal or trending type of events, you want to make sure you have your ad creatives and ad text rotated out to really make sure to hit whatever is trending. So common thing is typically any kind of political apps or news related apps. You want to make sure if you want to boost more installs during that time frame, have the relevant ads there. So those are some of the things mentioned on this slide. And then for the next two, I'll go ahead and move to the separate slides, as these are actual advanced things you can do in AdWords today. So search terms reporting is absolutely great, and you can use this on any of your search app install campaigns. So as you can see from the screen here, what you're going to want to do is when you click on the campaign, click on the keywords tab you see there, and then once you have those three options right below it, click on the search terms button, and this is the screen you'll see. So since this was a test campaign that didn't have any impressions, you don't see any keywords here. But if you had a campaign that's been running for a couple of weeks, you'd actually see that you'd have all the search terms and keywords, as well as all the data associated to that. So if you're doing any kind of analysis, this is where you get to have a lot of flexibility of what you want to do. You can use this report to say, let's look at all the search terms and keywords that drove a lot of impressions and clicks, but maybe a very low number of conversions, or maybe even a high cost per install or conversion, right? So by looking at this view, you can actually start doing those types of analyses and further optimizing your search campaign. And this is a really common strategy that a lot of more savvy search advertisers do, especially because search is a very, very powerful network.
And one other thing actually here on search terms, remove all assumption that you think that you have all of the keywords that your audience would be looking for. I think a lot of times we get complacent with, this is my keyword list, this is set in stone, we can't add anything to it. But what we realized is the best way to get volume on search especially is to add more keywords, add things that you may not think will necessarily work, but somehow they do. You never know. Two of the same people or two different people could be searching for the same thing using two very different search terms. So it's important to really keep in mind that there's a very broad and very different audience out there looking for the same thing. And so you want to cover as many keywords as you possibly can.
Yeah, great point, Sean. All right, and then the second thing we can do for display campaigns is look at placement reporting. So as you can see from the screen here, what you want to do is when you click on a display app install campaign, go ahead and click on the display network tab all the way to the right, and then once you're there, click on placements. And then one last thing is right before all the columns to get to this screen, you would just basically want to click on the see all details button and then click on all. So it would take you to basically this screen. And what's nice is with AdWords, one of the biggest value adds of it is we show you just about everything. Quite literally all of the data you would ever want in your AdWords campaign. So what's cool about this view is that you can quite literally see the apps and the actual mobile websites that your ads are showing up on in the display network. So like what we saw with the search terms reporting, really powerful view, because now you can start doing analysis such as whitelisting or even blacklisting apps or placements that aren't driving a whole lot of value for you, or maybe driving really high CPIs when your campaign can't afford it. So by going to this view and looking at how your display ads are doing and looking at what apps and mobile sites it's actually showing up on, you get a lot of control. So even if you're doing the broadest targeting, doing little steps like this can further optimize your display campaign.
Yep. And one thing to note here is while the screenshot here is just for a display campaign, you can actually do this exact same thing on YouTube. You can see exactly which videos your ads are showing on, which ones are performing well. Maybe a lot of the people that download your app like Katy Perry music videos, and you can see that right there, exactly which music video, how it converts, how much it's costing you, and all this other data that we have for you. So that's also really useful for YouTube.
Yep, great point, Sean.
Awesome. So let's go to some questions. Let's see. Here's one here. My iOS search campaigns perform poorly compared to Android. Why is that? Okay, well, that's a good question. The reason that happens is with Android, especially on search, we can see the entire funnel. We can see if somebody is downloading a campaign from Google, or if they're searching for a keyword on Google, if they're going to go and download that app in the Play Store. On iOS, it's not as clear-cut. So we have to use some different proxies to guess, essentially, if iOS users are downloading your app. And so because of that, we can't create a target CPA campaign, but rather a CPC campaign. And that's how you can target on iOS search. So while it's not exactly apples to apples, we do find some success with iOS search, and it's definitely recommended that it's used. And we're working on everything that we can to make it as great as possible for everyone.
All right, looks like second question here. How do I set my bids on my iOS campaign versus Android campaign? Great question. That's actually very related to the previous question.
Yeah, it is.
So with Android campaigns, it's pretty straightforward. Since our Android search app install campaigns go on a target CPA, just use your target CPA and then change it based on the performance you're currently getting. For iOS campaigns, they're going to be CPC bids. So like you're saying, Sean, since we have less signals there, it's going to be a bit more manual, but how most advertisers understand it is if they have an assumption that perhaps there's going to be a specific conversion rate for a certain type of group of keywords, they back that out mathematically into, well, how much do I actually want to pay for install there? So obviously, those bids will vary, and if the keywords are very competitive, then you can expect those bids to be actually very high. But it is going to take more manual work, but the way you want to think about it is just to work backwards from understanding that if a user converts on this keyword, will it still mathematically work out to the kind of install I want or the kind of action I want?
Yep. And one more thing there, I know we're using a lot of acronyms here. CPC, cost per click, CPA, cost per action. Sometimes cost per action is also associated with cost per conversion, which is synonymous, but that's what CPA is. So the next question we have, what makes a good image ad? Wow, that's a very loaded question. So a good image ad, there's a lot of things that you can do. One, I think the most important is a call to action. Tell the user, tell the person that's seeing the ad what you want them to do. So in this case, it's probably app install. So if you have a game or if you have any sort of app out there and you want the user to download, make sure you have a clear download button. Sometimes the down arrow is a good way to denote that, and say, download today. And then I think another really good or really important learning is that make sure you have some sort of value proposition. Why should somebody download this app? Why would it be great for them to download this app? So if you're a tool, say you're a flashlight app, why does this user need your app? Maybe you're the best flashlight app out there. Maybe you launch the quickest. Maybe you have the best reviews. I don't know. Make sure you let the user know that. I think those are two really important things. The last thing that we see really work really well is use as many images as possible. While text is great, a lot of users kind of just see a few words of text. Maybe they'll see the headline. If you use image, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you use an image, you can really tell people exactly what your app does. Whether if you're a dragon game, show a picture of a dragon. If you're a flashlight game, maybe show some screenshots or something like that that show exactly what the app does. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think those are all really good. And it's funny that you mentioned that because the next question is how do conversion rates compare between the ad types that we just talked about? So one assumption you can have is the more engaging the ad unit, perhaps the higher the conversion rate is. One important thing to keep in mind is the more engaging the ad unit is, the more important the actual quality of the ad matters. Because we've seen it several times where developers might expect their video ad to have a higher conversion rate than their text ad, which maybe on a larger trend is true. But if their video just is not as good, if it doesn't follow a lot of the best practices that we just talked about, then it's going to have a lower conversion rate, right, compared to a more standard ad where there's less room for error. So we typically do see conversion rates be higher on the more engaging ad units like images and videos compared to text ads. But keep in mind that once you look into those ad types, conversion rates can vary very much depending on the quality. So if you're going to go with those ad types, make sure that the quality of those ads is up to par with what you want to do, and of course follows the best practices that we just mentioned as well.
Yep. So we have a live question here. Atishay says thanks, no problem. So the first question, in-display app install campaigns, how can I see the placements? You want to pull up that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go back to the placement reporting there. So this shows the final screen of how to get there, but just to reiterate the steps here is that when you click, this is what you see when you click on the campaign, and then the display network tab all the way to the right is what you have highlighted. So you want to click on that. And then once you get to that point, you'll typically see, this screenshot doesn't show it, but you'll see a summary. I'll automatically go to the summary tab where it shows the pie charts and everything, which is good. You just actually want to click on the placements button right next to it. So then once you get there, you're going to see the typical columns that might show a couple of the placements. So it's going to be next to the, I believe, the edit button. There's going to be a button called See Details. When you click on that button and then you click on All, that's when you'll see get to this part, which is the placement reporting. So that's the easiest way to see all the placements on the display campaign.
Mm-hmm. And one thing, as is always the case, in the top right corner, there's the date range that you can set. So you only see the placements for whatever date range that you're looking at. So in this particular screenshot, we're looking at the last 14 days. So AdWords will show us the placements for the last 14 days. If you want to see it for yesterday or just today or for maybe the last year, you can do that by just adjusting it up there.
Yep, and I'll have all the data literally from that time frame for every placement. So that's what we show.
Yep. He also had a question about universal app install campaigns. I never know where my ads are running. It's like anonymous to me. Let's see where the question is. I've tried to, okay, so it's around adding negative terms and really controlling UAC. So one of the things about UAC that really makes UAC great is the autonomy of it. It's really simple to set up, and it makes it easy for you to get started with Google Apps products. That being said, a lot of the control that you're used to is kind of removed to make the friction less. That being said, there are still a few workarounds to really understand how UAC is working for you. One thing you can do is if you're just looking at all campaigns in your account and you go over to the keywords tab, you can actually see some of the keywords that are in a UAC campaign or a UAC, but it won't break it down by campaign. But if you go into the UAC, the keywords tab disappears. So you have to look at it on an account level. In terms of negative keywords, Bao, do you have anything around that?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of CPIs going up, that really varies, actually, really depending on the developer. And of course, depending on the negative keywords that you actually put in. So if you're actually taking out a lot of keywords that are maybe, from a CPI standpoint, very low, then it would make sense that the average CPI is going up. From that standpoint, then you really just want to understand the logic behind, okay, if I'm taking out these keywords that have driven a low CPI, why is that? Since the main strength of the Universal App campaign is to drive installs at a cost-effective CPI.
Yep.
So this has happened before. Other developers, they've taken out some keywords that actually have maybe had a high CPI, and obviously it goes the other direction where CPI goes down. So whenever you're using negative keywords, and that's a nice thing that you could use for UAC campaigns to have some control, just really understand why you're doing that and just be aware of, again, the implications of it. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why a CPI can go up if you're obviously removing a lot of cost-effective keywords.
Yep. So the next part is, why is the actual CPI far away from my target CPI? So that's actually a question that we get a lot, and it has to do with Conversion Optimizer. So if you're creating a campaign, any campaign, search, display, or YouTube, and you put in a target CPI, generally for the first few days, Conversion Optimizer is doing what it can. It's crunching the data and using the algorithm to really get as many installs as it can under that target CPI. And in that time, there's a lot of things that happen. Conversion Optimizer has to look around. Imagine it has 100 buckets in front of it and has to search in each bucket to see where it's going to get installs at the price that you've inputted. Another thing is that there's a delay. So generally, you have a third-party attribution software, and you have AdWords, and there's a little bit of delay in the time that it takes for that third party to send data to Google. And in that time, we just know how much is spent, and we're dividing it by the number of conversions. And so generally, it's a little bit higher. But if you wait 24 to 48 hours, we should see all of the conversions come in, and then you should see that number go down. So best practice recommendation is never look at the data for just today or just yesterday, but maybe you look at it for last month, maybe 2 or 3 days after the month ends, and you'll really see a holistic picture on how it's performing. You have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and just the reason why you want to think about that from a longer time frame is also because of the sheer scale. Unlike other ad networks that focus on app installs, Google, between our 3 or 4 main products, very, very large. So that's why typically more data is better, and that is definitely achieved when you look at a longer time frame.
Yep. So I think we have 2 more questions here. What type of content should I have in my video? So I can take that one. So it's kind of similar to what we said about image ads. The thing about video is you can convey a lot in a 30-second video. I think the best apps have ads that explain exactly what the app does. So outside of games, if you have a utility app, or if you have a shopping app, or if you have some sort of app where it might not be clear how useful that app is to a person. You should help the user understand why they need it, how it would fit into their life, and why the product that you're selling them is really great for them and why they should download it today. And if you can do that in a concise way and have an engaging first 5 to 10 seconds where the user is like, oh, this is an issue that I run into often, or this is a problem that I wish I had solved in my life, then it keeps the user from clicking the skip button and foregoing the rest of the ad. So my recommendation is keep it succinct, make sure the first few seconds are really engaging and really speak to your potential customer, and really help them understand why this would fit into their life. You have anything to add to that, Val?
Yeah, I would say just on the flip side, the reason why we really mention that is because we have seen some cases where some of these developers, perhaps they're coming from a TV background or they've made TV commercials before, where maybe they are effective, where it's just a very compelling video, but like Sean is mentioning, we've seen it happen several times, where because even though the quality of the video is really high, maybe it's just really funny, it's really emotional, engaging, but there's no clear call to action. Well, that's just really, really important to have on YouTube, especially because the type of user that's on YouTube typically has the functionality to skip the ad. So if there's no point to it, the ad might be funny, but even if they watch it, what's the point? There's typically an action you want to elicit after the video. So absolutely, you're right, Sean. We need to have that in there, regardless of the quality of the video.
Absolutely. And then the last thing that someone wrote here is, when is it coming to iOS? I'm going to assume they're referring to UAC here. It's like I mentioned, we announced it at Google I/O last month, and it should be coming soon. I know it's in testing phases, and it should be out pretty shortly.
Yeah, we'll make quite a bit of noise about it when it is close to launch, so stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. I think that's all the questions that we have. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We hope this was really helpful. We hope you learned a lot. And if you do have any more questions, reach out to us in the comments, and hopefully we can respond there.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.